as John mentioned, the topic today, and I'm sure you all know the topic today is ESG, sustainability. And once upon this might have covered about half an hour of the end of a session at a conference somewhere with 10 people sat in the back of the room not really paying attention. But in the last decade, we've seen the importance of ESG, sustainability, social license to elements within that package rise in prominence, not just in discussions with stakeholders, but also in discussions with investors and with employees and community and government. And so, but it's not always an easy question to deal with, and it's not always an easy topic, particularly I think for juniors and mid-tiers to take on the challenge of how to approach ESG and sustainability, both performance and reporting and practical strategies. So we decided we'd bring an esteemed panel of speakers to discuss the matter, and I will introduce our speakers now. First, next to me, we've got Karen Patterson, founder and managing director of Trig Mining, potash developer here in Western Australia. Karen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Next to Karen is Jessica Volich, Group GM Sustainability for Perseus Mining, the West African miner who's active in Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and now Sudan. Alex Atkins, well-known non-executive director around the Travis, non-executive director of Parenti and Strandline Resources, among others. And also, as many of you will know, an increasingly vocal and highly intelligent and articulate speaker on these issues of ESG.
I'll pay you later.
And then joining us remotely, hopefully he'll come up on the screen and hopefully he can see us, is Chris McComb, General Manager of Sustainability at the Minerals Council of Australia. There he is, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, hopefully we've got sound. We'll get there. I want to kick off proceedings, Chris, and I think it's polite if we ask the person who's not in the room the first question to get you a bit more comfortable. I assume you finished your lunch a bit earlier than everybody else. Over the last decade, Chris, we've seen strong, positive ESG and sustainability performance move from, in the mining sector, move from a nice-to-have to an essential part of any company's corporate makeup, to now really being a potential positive and an advantage for mining companies. What's driven that change, both internally and externally, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Look, that's a great question. I hope you can hear me okay. And look, just before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians. In my case, I'm speaking to you all from the lands of the Ngunnawal people. Look, it's a great question, and this is a really, really fast-moving space. ESG has very much become central to company value. The magnitude of which has been quantified by our investor analysts and all the folk that the industry sort of works with. It's definitely no longer a nice to have. It's about managing risk, but also it's about maximising, very much central to business. It's become really central to the way that we operate, but the number of drivers in terms of driving the industry or the industry driving on this path are many. I would probably argue that more recently the investors have taken a more active approach to ESG. So it's fundamentally about future access to capital. You could argue that they have been active in this space, and they really are looking through the lens of risk and looking through the lens of risk management and company value. It's also about future access to markets. Not far behind the investor is the customer. And there's a growth of responsible sourcing initiatives out there. And we've seen, in particular in the critical minerals space, that governments are also looking to ensure that the suppliers, as they classify critical minerals, are also responsibly sourced and able to trace that back to the mine. So responsible sourcing of supply chain is another critical access. So it's about access to capital, access to markets. However, we shouldn't forget the communities, which are very much at the forefront of all of this. ESG performance supports growth of your company, but also future land access. Environmental issues are becoming big factors in delaying or stopping projects, and communities are becoming increasingly assertive of their rights. And this is all happening at a time where there is an increasing demand for mining to support the very, very large decarbonisation agenda. We only need to look at some examples in the US, some very large tier 1 copper deposits, which have been delayed or halted because of ESG issues. And these tier 1 deposits, and they would, 2 mines alone would supply perhaps half of the US's entire copper consumption. So these issues are coming up against the need and the growing demand for these minerals. That said, whilst we have focused on the risk, it really is about opportunity as well. It is really an opportunity for those that are willing to lead in this space. I think it's a great opportunity for Australian companies. I think we have a very good track record on ESG, and I think we're very well placed to supply the next phase of minerals industry demand growth.
Thanks, Chris. Karen, can I ask you, particularly on the point Chris made finally there about opportunity? I know you've spoken before on this very stage, in fact, about the opportunity you saw to be for Trig Mining to be a positive contributor to the environment and the society in which you operate. Do you think that's going to be a more common feature of mining companies, the creation of mining companies going forward? And can you talk us through sort of your strategy behind that?
Well, for me and Trig, it goes all the way back to when I was a teenager, in fact, camping with my parents and exploring abandoned mine sites and thinking, well, this is really great, but there must be a better way. And I went with stars in my eyes thinking I was going to change the world, as a teenager does, studying at the School of Mines in Kalgoorlie to be a mining engineer, because even at that early stage I knew the only way I could change things was to be in and be involved. So that's why I went into mining. And then some 8 years ago, when I was reflecting on my career and what I wanted to achieve with that, I was encouraged to write down my purpose, and my purpose at that point was to build mines communities can be proud of. And then you start a company, you give it a name, and it goes from there. So for Trig, it's very much about having been a purpose-driven company right from inception. And by doing that, you set your intention and you move towards what is going to deliver on that purpose. And for me, it was about quite a change coming from hard rock underground and open pit mining to start looking at electrolytes in brine, to then talk about fertiliser in the agricultural industry. But that just filters all the way through to everything that we do within the business. It is about building, now we've expanded our purpose actually to building natural resource projects communities can be proud of, and delivering a sustainable product for agriculture to improve their outcome as well. So it's all about the entire chain. So we talked about access to an investor market and investors making these decisions, but we need to understand that it's not just what we do on site either, it's everything that we do upstream and downstream, and our involvement around the products at the very end as well and where they go.
Thank you, Karen. Alex, we're going to put up a slide shortly. I'm just trying to get the clicker to work. You've talked extensively about ESG. Have you found a similar journey to Karen in your career? And how have you noticed the changes within the sector in that time?
Let's just say change is too slow for my liking. But yeah, I'm like Karen, where I joined the industry, saw a lot of things I wasn't happy about. Things like when I worked in Papua New Guinea, tailings dams going down rivers into the ocean, SBS coming and doing a documentary on the mine, and me coming home to my family and feeling ashamed of my industry and where I work is one example. And another one, I guess, recently with what's through the news, with way many people are treated on sites, not just women, also First Nations and minorities. So these are things that don't make me proud of my industry. And I love the mining industry and I want to be proud of it. And that's my life purpose, is to make mining better from the inside, because I know what must go right and what can go wrong. And I'm really, really focused on doing as much as I can to prevent disasters from happening, because they're really value destructive, not just for the shareholders, but for the stakeholders surrounding that mine. And I'd really like to see greater diversity in the leadership of the mining industry, because that leads to a bigger size of the pie, which means that your slice grows with the size of the pie, which is what comes when you have a diverse team in the leadership. So everything that I do is focused on those things: preventing disasters, making sure we do things properly in terms of STEM, and also making sure there's diverse people leading organisations so they can be the best possible versions of themselves, make optimal decisions, make us proud of our industry. And so that Venn diagram, you know, some people might see that as being maybe a little bit direct. Sorry if I'm direct, but that's what I'm like. So I see ESG as an interplay between three types of people. You've got your inside insiders, your inside outsiders, and your outside outsiders. And ESG initially was forced upon us by outside outsiders. But outside insiders also love ESG, because there's a lot of stuff we'd like to see improved, and we can see the value it brings. So the inside insiders will scratch their heads and they'll go, what is this about? I don't understand. Why do I have to do what someone tells me to do that's not even from my company? And there's a lot of pushback. So I imagine it as a yin and a yang. So all of those parties actually all need one another if we're going to make not just the mining industry better, but all sectors better globally. It's a good thing, and we all need each other, and we need to understand everybody's point of view, everyone's perspective, and hopefully come up with a solution that matches, you know, as much as possible what everybody needs.
Thanks, Alex. Jessica, on that point Alex has just made about outside insiders and inside insiders, it strikes me, you know, you come into a sizable company in Perseus as their first general manager of sustainability. Now, if a chief geologist comes in, exploration manager or chief operating officer or mining engineer, they're responsible for, they might have oversight on everything, but responsible for geology, or they're responsible for mining, or they're responsible for metallurgy. As sustainability officer, that means you are responsible for gender, you're responsible for cultural diversity, you're responsible for environment, you're responsible for communities, you're responsible for transparency of supply chains. How do you how do you even approach a role like that, and how does a company like Perseus that hadn't had that structure in place before approach?
I think the first thing I'd say is, it is a really wide scope, and sustainability itself, the scope is a bit undefined as well, because it's kind of everything, and it relates to everything as well. It's really much embedded within the fabric of how a business does business. But I suppose my approach coming into Perseus was really just to initially just take a stock take of where the company was at with sustainability, and using some of the great frameworks that have been developed across the industry. There's so many of them now, and there's the World Gold Council ones as well, which is specific to our industry, and lots of great examples across the industry of people doing really good disclosures and practices. So, you know, there's a plethora of information that you can lean on to really try and think about what does good look like in this space. I think the conclusion that I came to quite quickly with Perseus was, because all of the projects had been done to international environmental and social impact assessment requirements, a lot of the stuff was already there. I think that one is packaging it up and telling the story in a way that investors and other stakeholders could actually understand. And I think with all the multitude of frameworks, whilst helpful, there's a lot of them and it can be very confusing. So it was about trying to find the right story for Perseus, looking at the data and seeing how they're performing relative to peers, and really just taking a snapshot in time of where we're at, and where our performance areas were that we needed to improve, and where we can sort of keep going as we are. So I think with the multitude of frameworks and requirements that are out there, you can really get a good idea of where you sit and set yourself a good strategy. I think one of the really good things about the investor interest in ESG is that there's more and more data available, and it's easier and easier to compare yourself and really check in on how you're performing. But essentially, sustainability is hard to quantify as well, which is why it's taking some time for things to align. But yeah, that's the general approach at the moment. But making me sweat thinking about the role now.
Alex, can I ask you again? I'm interested in the notion of Jessica's saying there about peer comparison and looking at performance. About a decade ago, it emerged in the sector that we would see companies comparing their own health and safety performance, particularly on site, against peers, and using it really as a key indicator of operational performance. In fact, I think it's one of our guests here today, Dan Locker, was one of the first to mention it on stage, using health and safety on site as a key indicator of performance. Do you think we're getting to a stage where that's going to be, ESG is going to be seen, and sustainability performance is going to be seen as a key indicator to the overall health of a company?
I do, because there's something they've both got in common. It's called psychological safety. If you look at the big ticket issues that get reported in terms of reputational risk and destruction of value in companies, it's often around, it systemically comes right back down to whether or not they have any psychological safety in the business, and if it's actually okay to challenge, question, debate. And if you have diversity at the table, those conversations are going to be very rich, and you're going to think long and hard about your decisions and the unintended consequences of those, whether it's safety, whether it's financial, legal, social, environmental. And a lot of it does come down to first principles knowledge, understanding, and having some deep domain experts at that table as well. So yeah, I do believe ESG is probably a more mature version of what originally we focused on before, which was purely safety. What worries me though is that ESG is so broad that it's going to bury safety in all of that other information. And in mining, especially underground mining, safety, risk, they're pretty big ticket items, and if we don't have enough focus on those, we get distracted by all these other things that we're expected to report on and get assurance on. It's taking organisational energy and resources to do, is taking it away from potentially key critical risks that we also need to make sure we don't forget about.
Thanks, Alex. Chris, is that a problem that the expectations that you mentioned earlier, investors driving ESG reporting standards and ESG performance, is it a risk that investor expectations and priorities are different to those of the sector itself and how it operates, as the example Alex is using there of health and safety on site?
Yeah, look, I think there is a risk there. However, I think there's also an opportunity, because it provides a platform to engage with those groups on something that makes sense with respect to the sector. And I would argue from an investor point of view, and perhaps from a broad stakeholder point of view, I think a key issue that continues to come up is, do the commitments you make around ESG, are they implemented on the ground? It's all very well to have a policy or values or commitments out there publicly, but how do we ensure that that these are being implemented on the ground? So that means we've moved beyond the world of sustainability reports with excellent case studies. There's always a role for those. To calls for a more systems level approach to managing ESG, hence the linkage back to some of the fantastic systems that have been developed through the safety work that came prior. And it's important that whilst we do focus on our investors as well, we also need to ensure that we focus on our other stakeholders. And we need to ensure that what we do in this space, in terms of meeting some of those investor requirements and so on, is also translatable to the local communities within which we work. We need to be as transparent with them about how we operate as we are with the investors and customers and other key stakeholders in our sector. Thanks,
Chris. Karen, Alex mentioned earlier about diversity, cultural, gender, and so forth. Diversity being a real key to improving ESG performance in the development of TRIG. Have you looked for diversity? I mean, you've already had a good start in the fact that you're a managing director who's also female. Is that been a key component of how you approach a more sustainable, holistic ESG perspective?
It's vitally important, I think. We need more, this industry, especially in Western Australia, where we need more people, but we do need more diverse thinking. What we're measuring is now quite diverse, so we've gone from safety to adding ESG components to that. Our community engagement, transparency. We do need to move away from what was groupthink around how we go about mining, and the focus really was about making money at all cost almost. And that's what we wanted to change when we came, well, what I wanted to change when we came into the industry, is to respect country, respect our communities. And that is a cultural thing. And what I'm really proud of at Trig is how we've developed that culture through having that very clearly defined purpose. And then that attracts different people. And that has given us an opportunity as a small company with a market cap of $12 million at the moment, an opportunity to attract really fabulous talent that is diverse, that wouldn't otherwise necessarily be there if I was like exploring in a way that we used to explore and do things in the way that we used to do. So it attracts that diversity, and then that diversity attracts more diversity and creates that much more rich conversation that Alex is talking about around the table, and the questioning around the whole process. An example is investors are checking us out, but are we checking them out? We're going to get asked these things, like the situation we've just experienced in the last month with Russia invading Ukraine. Shareholders are asking everyone, what's your involvement there? And not just from what you're selling your product to, but your investors, a whole aspect to everything that we're doing. And we're not having those conversations unless we've got diverse thinking at the table.
Jessica, how does that apply in your role for Perseus when it comes to both gender and cultural balance and diversity? Is that a key objective of the company?
I think all of our mines are in West Africa and then soon to be Sudan as well. So I think the gender discussion is slightly different for us. I think, of course, at the corporate level, at the board level, we're having the same conversations and have the same questions. But I think something that's a challenge for us is having those conversations about our operations, when women take quite a different role in those societies, and it's not necessarily the same techniques and approaches that you would use here over there to improving gender balance. And there is more challenges to getting women in the workforce over there as well, and different considerations. So on the cultural diversity side, our main objective is to employ as many local people in our mines as possible. So we have at the moment 95% local employment at all of our operations when you put them together. And that's really our priority, is to really get as many local people benefiting from those operations as we can. We've got a diverse range of expats, of course, but really it's about benefiting the local people. So the discussion for us is slightly different. But of course, we are looking at ways to improve gender balance on our sites. We've got about 14% at the moment in our operations, and there's some low-hanging fruit there, but our techniques are probably a bit different.
Alex, do you think on gender, and I'd like to come back to the question of cultural diversity again in a moment, but on the question of gender, is the imbalance lessening? Are we improving? And are there specific areas of the industry where we should be looking at to improve that weighting?
I'm frustrated by the slow pace of change. I actually think that there's very little going on in the industry around growing people in terms of developing people and investing in people. And that the secret, I think, like Karen was talking about, I think if you have diversity, say, in the leadership of an organisation, it will generate a momentum that gives you diversity throughout the organisation. If you don't have it in the leadership, it's unlikely to get any momentum. And there's very poor diversity in leadership in the mining industry, which we know. I've got some stats, but I don't want to bore everyone. But, it's pretty bad. Generally speaking, it's 20% women in mining and about 15% women in engineering. I can't help but notice that stat because I am one. But and what you notice also is that it's like a funnel, and the intake or the entry-level roles is roughly 50-50, sometimes 60-30. But then as you get more senior, the women drop out. And you also see it in the membership numbers for the AusIMM. You know, you see them pretty strong and then 35, gone off the radar. What happens to those women? What a lost opportunity. All the investment in their education, their site experience, their knowledge, their networks, gone. What a waste. And that's just women. There's many types of diversity where this talent is wasted. So something needs to be done about that, I think. It should be a real focus. And I think up until now there's been a lot of effort put into optical events, lunches, awards, but not enough put into dial-shifting, game-changing initiatives that this capability amongst the less likely to be developed for leadership types of people.
Thanks, Alex. Chris, MCA had some figures out just a couple of hours ago, actually, regarding female participation increasing in the sector over the last 3 months. But as Alex says, particularly at a senior level and executive and management level, there is a lack of diversity there. Does the MCA and its members conscious of this? Are you looking for ways to address this?
Look, absolutely. This is a strategic issue for the sector on so many levels. We've had, let's face it, the industry has had a very challenging last few years with the revelations that have come to light around sexual harassment and workplace culture and everything. To do with that, it is absolutely not acceptable, and we absolutely need to get more women in mining, particularly in the leadership roles. But we can only do it if we ensure a safe, attractive working environment for women and people of all backgrounds. We're not going to be able to bring them in. And whilst the industry has made some great gains over the last few years, sort of collectively, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency last year recognised mining as sort of leading the way on changing the gender balance. But at less than 20%, there's so much more work to do. So I guess, coming at it from a collective or an association point of view, it is absolutely a number one priority for our board. We've launched an industry of choice inclusion and diversity framework, a code of practice on the elimination of sexual harassment that all our members sign up to. And indeed, we're actually running a series of webinars at the moment that anyone from industry anywhere is welcome to attend, talking to leaders on inclusion, diversity, sustainability, and other matters as they relate to the attraction of a more diverse pool of talent. So look, it's absolutely front and centre, and there's just so much work to do.
This isn't for anyone in particular, but is there an industry trying to emulate that has been successful in restructuring the cultural and gender diversity within its sector? Alex, I know you've had some stats. Have you seen any?
I didn't have anything based on an industry we can emulate. I actually think this is a global problem. It's every sector has this problem. Different sectors to different degrees. So, of course, mining's one of the worst, and defence isn't great. But, yeah, I actually don't think there is a role model. Do you, Karen and Jessica?
Yeah, I'm coming up blank there. I think the mining industry, as much as we are beating ourselves up, we have done a pretty good job in many aspects. And, when I think about how we've travelled around, social licence, the mining industry created that term. And we were really thinking about it, especially in developing countries and our role when we were going in there and developing projects around community. We have been thinking about this a long time. I think it's other industries that are now catching up to us around the ESG aspect. All right, we're not perfect. We've got a long way to go. Let's keep going. Yes, let's get a sense of urgency, Alex. Let's make it happen faster. But, I think there's a lot to be really proud of in what we've done.
I think it's a really interesting point, isn't it? And Jessica, on communities. And, there is no other industry in the world, really, that interacts with communities in their place more than the mining sector. How, particularly as a miner in West Africa, in developing and very poor locations many times, how does a company like Perseus approach that within the framework of ESG and making a positive contribution to society?
Yeah, I think, I suppose just reflecting your point and maybe building on it a bit, I think the industry, because of the high profile accidents and events that have happened, it does get a pretty bad rap, and it is sort of a bit of an easy target. And I think there's a lot of positive things there as well, lots, that don't get spoken about enough. And I think the work is one of them. You hear about the negative stories and the blockades or issues that have happened, but that there's a few of those, but a much bigger pool of really positive stories that of communities benefiting enormously from mining. But I think for us in West Africa, we are, as you say, in very impoverished regions, and usually with a lot of community around and very, very close to our operations. And I think from the get-go, Perseus was very aware that without building a relationship with the community, that you're just not going to have a project. The influence there and the need to really connect with the community is absolutely essential. But not only that, there's also a massive bigger opportunity there because of the impoverished nature of the communities in which we operate. Every sort of social dollar that we spend really has a lot of bang for buck, and some amazing things can be done in those regions and areas through local employment, through local procurement, through the projects that we do in education, in medical facilities. You can really transform a region with just having one mining operation over there. But we've had our challenges as well. I think, because of the impoverished nature of those areas, the expectation is huge when a company comes into an area like that. And it's about keeping that relationship, building the relationship, and also managing expectations, and making sure that we're speaking to the right people at the right time and having that real two-way dialogue process happening, having our grievance mechanisms working really well, and staying engaged with our government stakeholders as well. But I think, if we can sort of tackle all of those things, the benefits to the communities are huge.
Alex, one of the companies you're on the board of, Paydirt, has extensive contracts in right across Africa, in fact. When you look at that company's work, are you proud of that there's an Australian company operating in these developing countries and making a positive contribution?
Extremely proud. They've been over there for 30 years. When you look back to the original Ausdrill and Barminco, which is inside of Paydirt, and I'm really, really proud of the training centre that they've built in Botswana that's already had, quite a few people through it. And there's a lot of requirements in these countries, starting with Ghana, around local content, and many of these West African and East African countries have a requirement, sometimes even for government ownership of the entity that you're operating from, which is what we've just done at Strandline. There's the chairman of Strandline just there. So I think to make sure that you share the wealth and actually grow the people and help them to develop the skills and capabilities and capacity to actually do it for themselves in the future is a really great thing to do.
Thanks. The other major topic, and we've talked about competing priorities within this huge ESG space. The other major topic at the moment, of course, is decarbonisation and the role that mining can play in both decarbonising its own operations, but also wider societies. Karen, we've spoken before on the idea of TRIG and its project development of a sulphate of potash project, which can have net benefit contributions to society. Can this current trend with the development of technology, with the focus on potash and other future-facing commodities such as lithium and the other battery metals, is this an opportunity for mining for once to break away from the traditional reputation and become a net positive contributor to society?
Absolutely, but we already are, I think, net contributors to society, because we wouldn't be sitting here on chairs with tables and eating irons if we weren't mining all of this stuff. But with TRIG and potash and learning about something quite different for me, the ability to produce a product that if we use this instead of something else, which is a lot what the battery industry is all about, is we can make this positive, sustainable contribution to what we're doing. And for those of us in the room, probably all mining people, when we're not in agriculture, this project is so much more about agriculture than anything else. And in fact, the team at a recent strategy day challenged me on the company name, because what are we doing? Is it mining or is it developing a natural project? It's about harvesting solar energy. It's using nature's endowment to produce a natural product for food security. We hear about, in potash particularly, this muriate, which is coming out of Canada in big numbers and big volumes, but half of that's chloride. And our farmers are putting essentially salt, these are all salts, but detrimental salt on their soils, and hoping that the rain's going to leach it out and put it in the waterways. But if we can use sulphate of potash instead, it's much more efficient fertiliser, so we can change the sustainability of agriculture. They can preserve the microorganisms in the soil because they're not changing the pH. You know, this is all really, really important. And these projects, like we're looking initially, so Trig made the discovery last year, we're talking about a 21-year mine life already, and that's 41% of our current deposit, yet we've only drilled half the strike length. So what we're talking about is something quite long in life, so the sustainability aspect to that. And then that creates so many opportunities in community to create those employment opportunities, that the custodians, for me, the traditional owners of Lake Throstle are going to be involved in this project much longer than me, because it's going to be there long after I'm not here anymore. So we need to make sure that we have got that consultation in place to really, to almost have that transparency. And something else I was going to add in this conversation is, you know, ESG reporting is all about transparency. Yes, we've got frameworks, and there are thousands of frameworks that we can adopt, but it's about communicating on the transparency. And to me, we can't do that unless we have transparency within the business as part of the culture. It's the engagement, everything. Everyone's got to be authentic and honest, and there's no sales pitch. It's got to be, this is where we are, and this is how we're going to do it.
Thanks, Karen. Chris, is it a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the mining sector to change its perception in the minds of the public?
Look, in terms of, look, we've always had difficulty connecting our communities to the products that we product in a coffee cup as such. So we've always had difficulty connecting our industry with the communities. But look, the opportunity is huge, obviously, for the sector to be part of that, part of the decarbonisation agenda, for the battery minerals, as well as for our existing minerals and our existing exports and the like. However, we just need to tell the story more effectively of our. I think that's really critical. Look, without a doubt, expectations on the sector have evolved over for forever, but certainly over the last 5 or 10 years. So we are working in a very, very different environment. The fact that we're mining minerals that people might be happier with versus other minerals or more closely connected with because they're in their smartphone. Look, that does provide some opportunity to us, but we need to tell our broader story more effectively, and particularly, I guess, from my perspective, Australian mining story more effectively, because we do lead in this space.
Thanks, Chris. Jessica, this goes back to your point earlier about one of your first roles when you came into Perseus is to tell that story of even though you had all the elements there. And it sort of goes back to the idea of reporting frameworks and how companies approach reporting ESG and sustainability performance. With all the international frameworks out there and global principles, how difficult is it for a smaller company like a Perseus or even a Trig to display what they're doing in a public forum?
Yeah, I think the challenge for smaller companies is really trying to work out which of those frameworks make sense for their business, and which of the multitude of questionnaires that come into the inbox, which ones do you respond to? Because with the volume, really, you could be spending all your time doing that. And it's about trying to really work out which ones are right for your business, which ones are going to have the most impact and talk to your investors the best. what audience those frameworks are talking to and who they're designed for, and then being really, really targeted around what you do and what you don't do, which is the most important part. But also it really comes down to your materiality assessment as well, like what are your material issues? What's important for your business, and then really educating your investors about what those things are. So this is why you respond to this one and not this one, and this is why maybe you've got a disclosure of 6 pages on this issue and 1 on another issue, is because of the materiality of those issues for your business. I think all these frameworks are starting to converge. I know there's a lot of work going on around the world to try and really converge all of these complicated frameworks into one thing that just can make sense. I think the challenge is that mining is, an industry, but they're all different mining types, and they're all in different regions, and they're so different, even though you can call it all mining. There's so many different types of mining and so many different issues and impacts depending on where the community is, depending on where you're located. So the complexity comes, how do you get a framework that really can be universally applied, but also gives you some interesting and useful information? And I think that's where the struggle has really been. All of the frameworks have come from different groups from a different perspective, which don't necessarily readily apply to everywhere. So I think with the ISSB framework, I think there's a lot of high hope there that will be the holy grail, but we'll see.
Alex, do you think it's a challenge that for mining companies, particularly smaller ones, to find a fit-for-purpose handbook and principles for reporting?
I do. I think we've got a rash map that we have made. I don't know if it's a good
We're just going to
time
put
to
that
pull
other
it up.
slide on now.
So thank you, Dr. Rocky Bona from Sandpit Innovation. Please stand up. She created this for me after I called for help. There she is. Thank you. So I put a plea for help out on LinkedIn a month ago, knowing I was going to be here, because there's so many frameworks and standards. And it's like, oh my God, how do you help people through this? And I'm not saying that Rash Map is absolutely perfect. I mean, this is the first draft, I think, and it'll get refined over time. But you need something you can look at with a blink almost and sense make, okay, where am I in the world? And what am I doing? And what do I want to focus on? What's material to me? What framework best suits my needs? There's a lot of groups, all over the world that will, like you just said, push their own barrel. And they can be pretty loud groups, and they can easily distract you away from what's really important to your company. So it's about, I think, knowing what you're all about, your purpose, and focusing what you do in the ESG space on that purpose, and staying true to the value you bring, and don't get too distracted. There's some things you can't avoid, like the anti-slavery and the anti-bribery and corruption and all of those kinds of, the TCFD, you can't avoid, and the decarbonisation, reporting. But I do believe there's just too many frameworks, and you could easily end up like you're playing Twister with your head up someone's bum. So you really want to make sure you focus in on where you're going to get the most value.
Chris, the MCA's developed its Towards Sustainable Mining initiative. How did you develop those principles, and what interaction did you have with the industry in putting that together?
Yeah, look, thanks. I'd like to say we take credit for developing TSM, but no, we didn't. We've always had our enduring value sustainable development framework, which is very corporate level focused, policy and process focused. But about 3 years ago, we realised that we needed to take a step change, and we absolutely did not want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to look at what was already ready-made, had a track record, and could answer the variety of questions that are being asked of the sector here in Australia. And they are so TSM is a Canadian framework originally, although it's much more multinational now. And it sort of satisfies a couple of key criteria for us. One, that it's accessible to all companies of all shapes and sizes. So you don't need to be a global multinational to implement this. It's a very simple framework that can be implemented at all levels. Two, it actually gets implemented at the site level, and increasingly we're seeing calls from investors, certainly customers, as they relate to responsible sourcing and very importantly, our local communities, trying to understand, how transparent are you around your ESG performance, and can I trust you effectively? So those components were really, really important. The simplicity was really important. And also it's overseen by a multi-stakeholder advisory group. And that's all about in building further trust into the governance of the system. It's all very well for an industry to come up with its own set of standards. That's great. But if it's not trusted and it doesn't satisfy the needs of your stakeholders, then it's all a little bit moot. And on the question as it relates to the myriad of standards out there, it is an incredibly confusing and growing space. And we have a very large agenda on ensuring that TSM does talk to that variety of other standards, whether it be ICMM, World Gold Council, IRMA, and the hundreds, well, it feels like hundreds, the dozen or so others, just to start to narrow and rationalise the reporting burden on our members. That's absolutely critical and kind of front and centre in our initiative.
Thanks, Chris. I suppose, Karen, it comes back to your point earlier on about having, whatever you're reporting, whatever your performance is, you have to have transparency through the company as well and through the culture of the company.
It's pretty fundamental to all of that, and I think that is what shareholders are asking for. It is not to be given a sales pitch anymore. It's to be told the truth, but the truth needs to be really honest, and that is what is being driven here is much more ethical behaviour, and ethical behaviour on the outside as well as the inside. And I think all of this is capturing and going right back to our careers really started in this mine industry around safety and improving the reporting of that. The questions were asked right back then around the transparency and in fact we just looked at a report yesterday and we were probably maybe not quite there on the transparency yet, but I think that is where we're heading, and to me that's our purpose. To build something communities can be proud of. It captures everybody. It captures our local communities, but it captures our employees, our investors, and that's part of it too. Like we celebrate when we have a shareholder call us, because not in the past you would probably cringe because they're going to call and complain about share price, especially when the SOP industry in Western Australia has not been doing so well, and we're all very much underwater. But our shareholders are so engaged and so excited and calling me and saying, how are you going to bring this into production? Because we need this. We need this fertiliser in this state. We need it globally. We need more sulphate of potash. So it's about bringing everybody on the journey and being really authentic in that process.
Alex, is that also a potential answer to the industry's crippling skills shortage? You mentioned earlier about attracting diversity helps with create more diverse thinking. But we reading just yesterday that Gen Z looks with disdain at the mining sector. Can achieving greater ESG transparency and better, stronger performance help answer that question as well?
Yeah, I think when we start to see the demography inside of companies, first and foremost, looking like the demography of the community, we're going to have more community buy-in and more support. And you're going to find the younger people in the country. I mean, I've got kids, they're 15 and 18, and they are full-on social warriors, social justice warriors, sustainability warriors, and I think they all are at that age because it's their future. That's looking pretty shaky right now, and they're paying the price for the behaviour of the people before them, and they're not too happy about it. And they don't want to see same old running companies. They want to see people that will stand up for them, and they want to work for people like that.
Jess, you've seen it Perseus, with a braver or a more positive approach to sustainability and ESG. Are you seeing younger employees attracted to the business because of those credentials?
I think there's definitely interest. I think in general, the school curriculum these days is much more left than it have ever been, and so I think kids coming out of school these days are much more educated on these issues. They know how it sort of plays into business and what needs to be done in the future. So I think you're facing a different pool of graduates and young people coming into work. I think Perseus is a unique kind of value proposition for a graduate. You know, we're in West Africa and going into Sudan, and I think, you know, that's an exciting opportunity for people, but I think the challenge for us is to describe, you know, what does that mean and how does that look as an employee here in Perth, and what sort of opportunities that provides. But our sustainability story is woven into the fabric of who we are, so I hope that resonates.
Chris, did you have anything to comment on that answering of the skills shortage with strong ESG credentials?
Oh, look, it is a strong area of focus. Look, people want to work for companies whose values align with their own, and I think that's really important that we continue to ensure that we create that environment where we align with contemporary societal values. On that last point regarding our education system, look, there perhaps are those that still have a very 1990s view of the mining sector. And once again, it comes down to us being able to tell our story more effectively and to believe us. But also, I just wanted to add, you know, our sector has incredible capacity to make positive change in the communities in which we work. You know, we spend a lot of our time sort of, you know, examining our navel and considering our faults, and we absolutely must do that to continually improve. But we've done a huge amount of good, a huge amount of positive work, and certainly positive effort out there. And that's not just the big companies. That's you know, companies of all sizes that I've seen both operating here and overseas as well. You know, if we can get those messages out there, hopefully we'll continue to will remain a more attractive place for our workforce of the future.
Thanks, Chris. Now, in the interest of diversity and inclusion, I feel very conscious that I've been asking all the questions so far. So I'm going to try and include diversity in the questioning by asking our audience to raise their hand and test our panelists with some questions. I think my colleagues, Michelle is up there ready to roam around with the mic. Have we got any questions first of all? And I'm sure we've got plenty of comments as well. We've just got one. We've got two. One, Musa's got one here. Michelle, and then if you could just let us know who you are and if you are speaking on behalf of somebody.
Thanks. Musa Gondwe, International Women in Mining and Association of Women in Mining in Africa. And to pick on Alex's reflecting what their community looks like, and it's really great to see a conversation about cultural diversity as well as gender diversity. Most of the time, the focus on diversity, particularly in the Australian context, is women and then First Nations for particularly obvious reasons. But in terms of leadership and opportunities to consider gender and cultural diversity at board level, and if we think about some of the larger companies like Anglo American and Barrick and Goldfields, they definitely have women of color that sit on their boards. So I'm wondering, is there opportunities to have conversations with the juniors and the mids about thinking about cultural diversity at the board level, and what would that take?
Alex, did you want to take that one on first?
Well, I'd like to say Strandline's got, it's not a woman of colour, it's a man of colour, as a director for the Strandline Tanzanian subsidiary, and he's my alternate director. And he's an awesome person who's done some great work, hasn't he, Didier? But yeah, there's so much work to do on this front, Musa, and thanks so much for bringing it up.
Karen?
Oh, look, I think often when we still look at boards, I think back to when I was an analyst, probably 15 years ago, and I just kept looking at all these boards that all kept looking like each other. And I'm like sitting there going, there's something wrong with all of this. But what we have seen over that time is quite a change, and we're on the journey. We're not there yet. We definitely need to fill the funnel, as Alex said. We need to keep looking, and we need to make sure that we actively look at a diverse list when we are looking at our boards and setting examples. So it's incredibly important to do that, and it's important to be encouraging. In Western Australia, which is where I operate, I really get excited when I see Indigenous businesses established and building that business experience, because We need people on the boards that have got business experience. So as we build up that pipeline of people from Indigenous backgrounds that can come through, I really hope that we see more Indigenous people on mining boards in the future, and absolute diversity, cultural diversity, representatives from communities where we operate. So.
Are we seeing that diversity at a senior level in Perseus in West Africa? Jess?
I think locally, of course, we have our boards, which are mainly comprised of people from the countries in which we operate. But I think here in Perth, our board does have good gender diversity. And we do have cultural diversity as well, but not of colour, I have to say. I think as the company evolves and as it changes, all of those things are being considered and thought about, and it's absolutely important that we have that representation, particularly for a company like Perseus, who operates in Africa, and making sure that there's that representation across the company.
Chris, has there been any discussion within the MCA or any of your members about practical tools to increase that cultural or gender diversity within the makeup of boards?
Look, absolutely. Like all the diversity issues, they do feature very strongly, and I think the benefits of diversity are really becoming, more and more obvious, I suppose. So companies are certainly setting their own targets and running with their own approaches, but collectively it is very much central to the discussion. And I think there is an advantage, I think, of working on an issue like this, because not all companies are resourced to find their own pathway, because there is probably leading practice out there, and it's about leveraging that for your own purposes. And I think, it really is about, identifying what the issues are with respect to the pathway to the board. It's about, identifying the needs, identifying the barriers, and what does good practice look like in terms of overcoming that to ensure that we do diversify our boards. And look, to be honest with you, the broader leadership within our companies, it's not just about boards. That's great, and it's really important, but it's really ensuring that we have diversity in our senior leadership, as much as possible. It's growing. We've made some good steps, but obviously it's a journey.
Yeah, I think that's what you were saying before, Karen, about having the experience to be able to fill those positions by giving them the opportunity. And again, what you were talking, Alex, earlier, Musa, I don't know if you've seen the report, the report from the NFL. They implemented 10 years ago the Rooney Rule, which ensured that any senior coaching position had an African-American candidate interviewed, at least one African-American candidate. Ended up tripling the amount of African-American coaches in the league and in senior coaching positions. So it might be an interesting one can that be applied to another sector? Yeah, we've got a question here.
Hi, I'm Brendan Augustine from Bina Group. Thank you for your question. It's a segue to, I think, to the value proposition of what's just been proposed and talked about. I think I've worked in Africa for a long time, and Australian companies have a great reputation on doing so many good things, whether it's on the environmental side, increasingly on the gender side. I think this is a great tool if you can add it into your toolkit to bring that cultural diversity into your play. Some European companies don't do as well as we do in terms of the other stuff, the community engagement, the lack of hierarchy, the closeness to the community, but they do much better when it comes to cultural diversity of leadership, of board members, of understanding the history, the languages of the places in which they operate. So I think Australian companies can learn and can do better and augment all the good points they have already on the environmental and the gender side of things. So it's just a suggestion out there, and I think just an endorsement of what was said earlier. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, thank you, Brendan. Yeah.
Dom, I just want to just have a few comments quickly about women, because there's too many women here for me to be a bit too get off the rails. I do support the Australian women cricket team, and I enjoyed passing up on the news in Ukraine war just for a while to see how they'd perform against the South African women. So I'm all for that. And when it comes to the mining industry, we have 100 dump trucks. It's a real pleasure to have women drivers, and they are legendary for their reputation. Cleaner operators, us men, some of us like motorbikes. You give them much of cattle or something, they wreck the motorbikes because they've got other agendas. And with vehicles, it's similar, but women do a fantastic job. So I'm a great supporter of women, and couldn't believe they're going to play football. What a fantastic sport. But let's get away from that. You talk about, I made a mistake. Alex in the yellow jacket, didn't know who she was, didn't know she was a presenter. I get introduced, she's got a red dot up on the left side of the chest there somewhere. And I said, it says 30%. And I made the mistake of saying, well, does that mean you're not the full quid? Anyway, I've been sitting next to her, we've reached a peace arrangement, and she wanted my opinion, but I've broken loose. Look, my question really is, the 20% that we have in the labour force, I'd like you to ask the speakers there, presenters, is what do they think about the issues? I mean, men are different to women, and a lot of women will choose to have families, children, and I suspect the mining industry, no matter what we do, can be remote, long distance. I'd love you to ask the question, what they think. I mean, we're short of truck drivers. Yeah. Desperately short of truck drivers. Women can drive trucks, don't you worry. They know how to drive.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry it took a bit long.
Just so you know, I'm the full quid. Okay. I have kids, and I'll just tell you a quick story. When I was a child, I had to resign from my role, which was FIFO operational role, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to finish up in mining. I wanted to keep going. There's a lot of assumptions made, and these assumptions come from people not listening and not asking the people who are affected by these assumptions. There's a lot of women in the industry who drop away at the age of 35 because of assumptions that are made about whether or not they are worth investing in for leadership and development and retention. So I think this is the reason why we have a problem with attraction, because we don't invest in retention and development of the women who do join the industry. And often the women that do join the industry are there because they are really interested in it and they love it, and they actually have a lot to bring to the table. They're usually highly conscientious, very diligent. I've never come across one that's not actually really hardworking and good at her job. The fact that these people drop away around about the age of motherhood, or a perceived age of motherhood, is actually a really terrible thing. Is that a good enough answer?
I think, is there strategies the industry could be employing to retain those people who have to drop out when they do?
Yeah, I actually have something I'm trying to create, which there's a few of them in the room, but I'm not going to say too much. We'll just wait till we kick some goals and then we'll let you know about it.
Jessica, Karen, did you want to?
I think for me, I've been in the industry since, the late 90s. Got 3 kids myself, and it has been a challenge, I have to say. I think early in my career, I spent a lot of time on site and getting lots of site experience, and that really held me over well for when I was having children, because I was able to contribute a lot in a corporate role. And then as my kids have got older, I've got the freedom more to be on site again. But I think for me, I think the things that have really helped is when companies have really supported me to be able to balance the two. And the challenges I've had is when it hasn't been easy to do that. And I've had good experiences and not so good experiences. But I think if the industry really, at the end of the day, women have the kids. So there's no getting away from that. So how do we support women more through those having kids years to help them stay in the industry and continue on and continue to add value to the industry?
Great, thanks. We've got some more questions. We've got one just in the middle here. If you want to raise your hand nice and high. There we go. Angelique is going to come to your right.
Thank you. I actually have a question that kind of builds on that previous question. My name's Peter Thompson. I'm from Parenti. I was looking at the Chief Executive Women report from 2021, and it does show that there's an increase in female representation on boards, but there is not an increase on female representation as CEOs across the ASX 200 and the ASX 300. It also indicates that the line roles that lead to CEOs are not very strong in women, so P&L management roles. And then just tying that into your comments around the number of women dropping off after 35 years old, what are your thoughts around how, because it looks like if we continue in this train, the percentage of female CEOs across all industries in Australia is not really even going to grow in the next 10 years. So if we continue in this vein, that, you know, that's where it's going to go. What are your thoughts on how to address that issue of women leaving the industry after 35, and how do we make it more attractive for women to stay, and not just women? You know, I'm obviously talking about diversity in general, but you know, these are the statistics on women. But how do we what are your thoughts around keeping women in to more senior roles and enabling a stronger progression? Because as you've said, we're getting 50% of, I think it's something like 60% of university graduates these days are women. And we're seeing still in the ASX 200, there's only 9% of female CEOs. Sorry, long question.
Do you want to take it? Sure. Well, I am a female CEO, but I'm not in the ASX 100, 200, 300, or probably even 400.
Yet.
But, yes, exactly, yet. But what I have seen recently, which gives me a lot of hope for the future, is with the ballooning of IPOs that we saw last year. We saw over 100 IPOs. And to put that into perspective, in 2019 when Trig listed, and I'm just talking the resources sector for this, 5 IPOs existed in that year. 4 were gold, and then there was Trig. So 100 last year is a remarkable growth in this space. And with that, you have to have a minimum of 3 directors. The investors are saying, where's your diversity on the board? We've seen a huge number of women join boards as a result of that. And when a colleague of mine and I look at the list and look at who can we attract to the conference agenda, because I was a CEO in my early 30s, and I was the only woman on the stage for a 3-day conference. And when I went back to that 3-day conference with Trig, I was absolutely disappointed to see that I was still the only woman on that agenda. But what we're doing, and all of those new IPOs, is definitely changing that pattern. We identified over a dozen women CEOs on that list for the future, so hopefully we can bring more along to that. And it is about you know, seeing women in those roles, inspiring people to have those careers. It's incredibly important to have that diverse exposure for everybody and celebrate people's success, so that and I think back to when I was a young girl making those decisions. My mother showed me an article which happened to be on Sue Murphy, and in Western Australia most of us will know who Sue Murphy is. She's a civil engineer. At the time she was working at Clough Engineering, and I thought, fantastic, you know, I can see that and I can see me doing that, and we need more of that.
We do. And we've got a couple of tables here that are full of people who are associated with me, and those tables are sponsored by the 30% Club. And the 30% Club has a bit of a remit. It's actually a global group with a national branch in most of the big countries. And so their remit is to make sure that boards have got at least 30% females on them. And they're also really keen to see the leadership, the executive team, the line roles that feed into the executive team to have preferably 30% female minimum. And also they're really keen to see IPOs have females CEOs, chairs. We have an IPO female chair in the room. Christy Young, stand up please so we can clap you. Last year was a huge year for IPOs, as we know, and I think there were quite a few women on the boards of those, and some CEOs who who IPO'd. So this is really, really important. Historically, the percentage of females participating in IPOs has been terribly low. It even got the attention of the 30% Club in their statistics. So they said that in 2019, 2.9% had female CEOs, 6.2% had female chairs, and they had 21% female directors in IPOs in 2019, and I'm pretty sure 2021 definitely was a lot better than that. To your question around how do we retain the women, so one of the reasons why I got on the what would you call it, the juggernaut of the digital transformation of mining, so interested in it and wanted to be a part of it, is because I could see it as a solution to a problem, and the problem being what effect. How do you keep doing your job when you can't go to sites anymore and you can't work huge long hours and be away all the time? That's a real problem for women and for other people who've got caring responsibilities. And hello, don't we want caring people around us? Doesn't it make the workplace a nicer place to be? Doesn't it make you a better leader? Because it means you grow people, you look after people, you care. So I think that the skill set that gets developed, the soft skills that get developed through motherhood and caring are very important skill sets, and we need to retain that in the industry. So the digital transformation of mining makes virtual work, virtual teams, remote operations, autonomy possible, and it makes it more accessible, not just to women, but people who are disabled or differently abled and other minorities. It really opens everything up. It's a great equaliser if it is developed the right way, so it's inclusive.
Thanks, Alex. And unfortunately, I'm sure there's lots more questions and comments, but unfortunately, we've hit the end. In fact, we're already 5 minutes over. So I knew we would overtime, but Bill doesn't pay me overtime, so I have to get off the stage. I'd like to thank everybody for their interest. Looking out, everybody's been hanging on every word the entire time. Thank you to those who asked questions and made comments, and also thank you to those who've still got them burning away. I'm sure we can somehow keep the conversation going. Just because it's the end of the panel doesn't mean it's the end of the session. The drinks will keep being served, and please. And before then, I'd like you to join me in thanking our panelists today. Chris over East, Alex, Jessica, and Karen, thank you very much for joining us today.